My name is Tim Coan. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Focus Solutions, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. Before I introduce our speakers and get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Throughout the webinar, all the attendees will be in listen-only mode, but there are two ways you can get questions for our speakers today. You can put those in the chat in the Teams meeting, or we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. Second thing is in about 24 hours, you'll get a follow-up email that will give you a couple of things, access to the on-demand recording if you want to go back and information about your your continuing education credits, and some details about part 2 of this series, which will actually take place on August the 5th, where we'll talk about what happens once a breach occurs. And we'll be sending out a separate invite to you as well, but all that'll be coming in an email in the next 24 hours. With that, let's jump in. Let me give you just a brief overview of where we're headed today. We'll spend a few minutes talking about what's happening broadly with the threat landscape and the rate of incidents and some of the kind of headline numbers that frame up the size of the problem. We're then going to focus most of our conversation around 4 particular myths and misconceptions that physician practices sometimes have about this issue of cybersecurity. Then we'll talk about some steps at the end to minimize some threats before getting to our Q&A. We expect to go about 40 minutes, and then that will leave us some time at the end for the Q&A. With that, let's meet our 2 speakers, guys that know a whole lot more about this subject than I do. First is Tim Grilling with Focus Solutions, and second is Jeffrey Daggerpont with the Coan Group. Tim, welcome. Give everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do every day, so they'll know the expertise you bring to this discussion.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I've been in information security, risk compliance for over 25 years in various roles, from IT auditor to director of information security. Worked with all different compliance frameworks and regulations from HIPAA to PCI to SOX. I've worked with different organizations and larger consulting companies like IBM and Protiviti, and also worked with Campbell Soup and some other organizations. My role with Focus is really to help our clients maintain secure postures within their organization, as well as improve their security controls. Excited to be talking to everyone today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks. Jeffrey, from Coan Group, tell us a little bit about your background and
yeah, thanks for having me, Tim, and honor and privilege to participate in this important webinar. I have been with Coan Group for 25 years now. Honesty compels me to tell the group that I am not technical in nature. I tend to deal more on the operational, vendor contracting, implementation, policy side. So I defining decisions, hopefully not career limiting. And more recently, I've been helping our clients adopt more advanced AI tools to help fight the battle of cybersecurity and become more defensive in nature. So looking forward to going on this journey today and not only learning from the others, but very interested in hearing audience participation towards the end and answering any questions. So thank you again for the honor to participate.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So let's get this started by just taking a look at how big this problem is. This is we normally in business like charts that go up and to the right, but this is a bad chart going up and to the right on the number of breaches that have been reported just in healthcare. Jeffrey, as you work with your clients and you cover a lot of things, this is one of the strategic things. What's your sense of the level in a physician practice of awareness of just how big and threatening this problem is?
Yeah, it's not only enormous, but it's growing at a speed that's almost unheard of. It used to be that you were fighting what I would call just the these lazy people work in their mom's basement just hacking. Now you got to fight bots, and the bots are deployed in the millions that can target and come after organizations. So, in my opinion, the only real way to combat this is going to be with your own technology and your own tools. I think that the rise is dramatically increasing at a rate that we've never seen before.
And Tim, obviously there were a couple of very large breaches in healthcare last year that even made the national news. But when you look at a chart like this, this is bigger than just those multi-million files. This is happening across the industry, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are only the reported breaches, right? We know that there are probably 5 times as many breaches that have occurred that are on this graph. Ransomware obviously has become a way more prevalent in the last 10 years. It's a way for attackers to get paid, which is why they do this, right? And it continues to evolve, right? It was typically ransomware. We're going to pay you, give you your data back. Well, they started ransomware plus extortion. Even if
right.
you didn't pay, they would send your data out there to embarrass you. So it's getting worse. It's continuing to evolve, and it's difficult to stay in front of these attacks.
And it's not just that we're seeing this frequency go up. The financial implications, which we're going to look at on the next slide, are pretty staggering in terms of what it costs. Again, guys, my question is, do you think a typical mid-sized physician practice has a sense of what one of these breaches can really, really cost to your practice? And even the threat of actually going out of business is not off the table, is it?
I would say that it's about 50% of the time a small business, small practice does not survive it. They usually have to either file bankruptcy or basically shut down. And even if they do recover, and even if their cyber insurance company kicks in, it's almost never enough to fully cover, especially when you add in the ongoing cost of paying for people's credit card monitoring that has to continue on, the damage to your reputation, the forensics that has to go into it. And worse, you might have to come under a corporate integrity agreement where you have to submit yourself to random audits or routine audits to make sure that you're compliant. So it goes far beyond
extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Tim, there's a statistic here just about how much more valuable healthcare data is. This goes back to your comment that this is a very lucrative business model for the bad guys, right? If they get healthcare data, what are they going to do with it? And why do we think it's so much more valuable in the dark market?
Yeah, it's interesting. And if you've never been through a breach, you definitely do not realize the full impact and financial as well as to the business. Healthcare data has become extremely valuable. There are groups out there that will just gain access to organizations and then go out on the dark web and sell their access brokers, right? So they will sell it to another group that will then go in and steal the data, right? And then they use that data to either extort the organization, or they'll sell that data on the dark web, right? If you're taking social security numbers, you're taking patient healthcare information, extremely valuable, right? And then those are the things that can bring millions and millions of dollars, as well as doing the ransomware or extortion.
Yeah, it's go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'll say real quick. I heard a term the other day that I want to share with the audience that I didn't know such a thing even existed. But there's something called ethical hacking, where all the hackers sort of police each other, meaning that if you ask for ransomware or money to release data and you don't release the data, they among themselves consider that very unethical, and they make sure that the hackers have a standard that they abide, because it is such a good business. They want to keep it going. They don't want to run off their customers. So the whole thought that you could have a group of criminals that that apply some standards and ethics to their was just fascinating to me because it is such a business. They don't want to run off customers. They want you to keep paying and they want you to know that you can trust them. If they got your data and they ask you for money, you can trust they'll give you back your data. That's their standard.
Yeah, and if I could add something
even the mafia had some rules, right?
Yeah, if I could add something real quick on that. In my last company, I started an incident response practice, and we helped hundreds of organizations. Ransomware groups almost act as like businesses. Some of them have help desks. So if you do pay the ransom and you can't get your data back and the key doesn't work, you can call their help desk to help you get the data back because, to Jeffrey's point, if, you pay them, they don't give you your data back, well, that's going to get out. It's going to make the attackers look bad, which is a kind of funny concept. But they operate as real businesses because, they have to get that money somehow. And if they don't, follow through with their word, then no one's going to pay them.
I think as weird as this, sort of backwards line of thinking is, I think the takeaway for physician practices is this is not just a small number of rogue players. These are organized. They're here for the long haul. It is financially lucrative. Thus, they want to protect the goose that lays the golden egg. So our approach and our mentality, we can't hope this storm will just blow over. They're here to stay. And they know that healthcare is lucrative. Guys, we're going to organize most of our comments today around 4 particular myths that we didn't just make these up. These are things we've all collectively heard from some of our clients. And we want to see if we can maybe expose why some of these things aren't real solid in their thinking. One of them that you hear often from physician practices, particularly smaller groups, is, I'm so small, they're after Change Healthcare, right? They don't want me. I've got 3 doctors. Is that a valid position to take?
Actually, I see the reverse of this. I think hackers by nature, because it's a volumes game, they're not very, in fact, I think in many ways they're kind of lazy. They want soft targets. They want
Absolutely.
fast and quick hits. And if you look at the actual cost per record on the dark web, a medical record is the highest value. They fetch anywhere between $200 to $300 per record. So a small practice, one that's been in business for 10, 15 years, could easily have over 100,000 records in its database. There's nothing small about that. Right. And so I actually think the smaller practices are probably, unfortunately, at most at risk because they're known to not have as sophisticated security. And sometimes they use smaller practices to hop to bigger opportunities. So you may be part of an ACO, or maybe they see that you're using a cloud vendor, so they compromise you. And the thought is they can then jump and compromise others. So small is very appealing to hackers because they see it as soft targets.
Especially because the threat is now so fully automated, the marginal cost is 0, right? And so, why do I want to attack someone that has a moat and a big gate when I've got other people that the front door's open and the light's on, right?
Yeah, and I think that's my response typically to this is if you're on the internet, right? If you have employees that have email addresses, you're on somebody's radar, right? Because likely those email addresses have been leaked in some sort of breach, right? Employees shouldn't be using their personal email to sign up for newsletters or, company, accounts, things like that. But we know they do, right? If your employees have been leaked on the dark web, if you're on the internet, you're on somebody's radar. Right. Every time a new vulnerability comes up, someone will go scan the entire internet looking for that vulnerability and don't really care who it is, right? So everyone is a target. Some of the larger organizations, those are, the great white whale that everyone wants to attack. But to Jeffrey's point, it is a numbers game, right? And if you can compromise 10 organizations and it takes little time, that's going to pay off in the long run. So everyone's a target.
Yeah, and this fact, this statistic is kind of mind blowing, right? It basically says if you've not had a breach yet, You're just waiting. It's almost a matter of time because of the attacks. Um, I spoke a couple years ago with a large healthcare organization, and they said our threat sensors tell us we probably somebody knocks on our front door 1,000 times a day. You know that the attackers are just constantly probing. Again, Jeffrey, to your point, these are bots now. They're not even humans, and so they work around the clock, and they don't take breaks, and they just keep going after this. Guys, we were looking at the chart earlier on how many breaches there have been. The reality is the vast majority of those are less than 10,000 patient records, right? I mean, again, the big ones make the headlines, but most of those breaches are somewhere between the 500 and 10,000 records. Jeffrey, to your point, you can easily get to 100,000 records in a very small practice.
That's right. Yeah, I think this validates that they're not. Well, I mean, the big ones make the headlines. They're probably more interested in the softer targets and the smaller practices.
Let's go to the second myth. And this has happened since the passage of HIPAA, right? The government passed these laws to do a lot of things. It included some things that, were going to protect us. A lot of times people will say, well, we're HIPAA compliant, like we're protected, right? Right?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite ones. And as I said earlier, I've dealt with a lot of different regulations, a lot of different frameworks. HIPAA is, I don't want to say vague, but it's open to interpretation. When you deal with a regulation like PCI says, okay, here's the type of things you need to audit. Here's how often you need to review that. Here's how long your passwords have to be, etc. HIPAA comes in on the other end to say you need a process, you need a policy, you need to document this. It doesn't say it needs to be good, right? It says that you need to do a risk assessment and have an ongoing risk process. Okay, well, I can do that. And if I talk to 10 different organizations, they're probably doing 10 different things. So you can be HIPAA compliant and still be insecure because of how you interpreted the HIPAA requirements. Switch a miss there on me. So yeah, I always my response to this typically is, well, HIPAA is designed to be the floor, right? You need to meet this compliance, but that doesn't mean you're secure. That means you're meeting the HIPAA compliance, but your risk assessment really is driving to see if you need to be secure in other areas as well.
Yeah, Jeffrey.
When I give in-services, this question comes up a lot because, hey, we did a security risk assessment and we checked all the boxes. And I wish I could remember where I heard this from because I really would like to give the credit for this explanation. But the best explanation I heard to address this question is, when you think of HIPAA, you got to put it in two compartments. One is security, one is privacy. So when you think security, think the lock on the door, right? You're there. You checked it. You got a lock on the door. I'm HIPAA compliant. The policy says you must activate the lock. Otherwise, you're not, the lock doesn't mean anything. It's just basically a lock on a door. So in order to have ultimate privacy, the two have to go together and work together. And so HIPAA says you must have a lock, but policy says you must lock it. So, and then you have to test yourself. Did you actually lock it? Did you verify that you locked it? Do you have a policy that says the last person that leaves the building has to lock it? They're looking for those kind of things. In the case of a breach, the very first thing they're going to do is say, well, look, hackers are smart. They got through your lock. It happens. But what did your policy say? And if your policy doesn't exist, or you didn't even bother to tell your employees or explain to the employees how to use the security device, then that's where the feds become very unforgiving. They're not. Now you've shown that you didn't demonstrate the full HIPAA compliance. You did part of it, but you didn't do the part that matters the most, which is the policy.
Well, the other thing about policy is, do we have one? Yes, it's setting up here on the shelf. do we follow it? Do we? Yeah. Uh, I'm famous for torturing analogies. So Jeffrey, since you went with the lock, uh, let's go one step further. The locks that HIPAA envisioned were a long time ago in terms of what we're experiencing today from hackers and ransomware, right? I mean, this world is moving so fast. I can have a lock and it could become very obsolete very quickly because the bad guys, back to our previous point, have a lot of incentive to figure out how to pick my lock. It feels like a lot of times HIPAA is talking about helping us with problems that are way in the past. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and you can do countless examples of this. We had a client the other day that the poor guy just lost his laptop at the airport. Well, that happens. I mean, we've all lost things. And he self-reported. The laptop was later found, and when it was handed over to forensic, it did get compromised. There was no encryption on it. So those are the two things, that you have to have working together. The client did the right thing by self-reporting, but then they also made the feds aware that they didn't have the encryption. So those are the sort of two things, you have to constantly be thinking about the device itself, but then what is the policy that goes with it? So it's important.
But the truth of the matter is the lost laptop story, which we were worried about early, the files in the doctor's trunk, that's really not where most of these threats are coming from now, right? Most of these are hacks. Talk a little bit, Tim, about
go ahead, Tim.
Why the threat universe has shifted, and which consequently, if you're just HIPAA compliant, you may not be fighting today's fight.
Yeah, I mean, most of the regulations were developed, 10, 20 years ago, right? There are new proposed regulations that update these existing regulations and try to make them more current. But, these regulations were not written with threats from AI in mind whenever they were doing this. So yeah, it's that's where you really need to focus your security risk assessment to look at current day threats, current day vulnerabilities, because that's really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and really help you to secure your environment and not just be compliant.
And Tim, I don't know if you've heard this stat also, but 40% of all compromises actually originate from insider threats. And now that's not to say that your employees are rogue and are coming after you. What happens is the employee gets themselves compromised through social engineering or some other hack to an individual, and then they bring that into the practice unknowingly. And so it's not that you have bad actors who work for you. You just have employees who are much easier to compromise in their personal life. When they hack their pizza app, they're probably using the same password for that app that they use to sign into their computer. So that allows for a lot of additional intelligence. It's not hard to find out where somebody works. Just go look at them on LinkedIn. Then it's even easier to find out their email address because it's published on your website. So hackers know how to stitch these informations, these little pieces together until they get what they need. Most people think a hack is this Russian computer savvy code cracking wizard. It's a lot of times the hack is they just compromise the individual and they just log in. There is no cracking of code.
Right. One more analogy. In the world of surgery, we do all kinds of things to prevent infection. But oftentimes the patient is the primary person carrying the infection into the OR, right? It was in their nose or something, and we have an infection in surgery. So all the thing, Jeffrey, I think your point is you as a company can do all the right things, and your employee outside your company does something, and inadvertently, now we're on the inside.
Right.
Let's look at the next myth. The third one is, and this is interesting, right? Because a lot of our software vendors, our EHR accounting system or HR system, part of what their value proposition is, and it's legitimate, is your application is in the cloud. And in the cloud, there's, whether you're in a public or private cloud, there's a lot of investment in security. Is this a false level of protection that just because my data is in the cloud, I'm okay?
Yeah, maybe I'll say just as a high level comment before we get into commenting on this topic. I know of no vendor, and whether it's eClinicalWorks, ModMed, Athena, NextGen, they all take cybersecurity extremely high. In fact, many of them have achieved the high trust certifications, highest standard you can have. Having said that, I do think that there's only so much they can do. Your employees can still compromise your cloud vendor by allowing them to log in. It's kind of like blaming your mechanic for the hail damage because you didn't put your car in the garage when you knew a storm was coming in. So it even though there is some level of protection, candidly, if you ask me what is more secure, an on-premise server sitting in your closet next to your water heater or a cloud vendor, the answer is always going to be a cloud vendor usually has a level of sophistication that we could never accomplish as a private practice. So I think your ability to say that you're more secure in the cloud is true, but I don't think I wouldn't say you don't have anything to worry about because I think you do. Plus, the cloud vendor is only going to be focused on that one application. Most practices nowadays, I've seen some small practices that have as many apps as a small hospital. Then you have Internet of Things. You have a lot of things that's in your IT stack that coexist with the cloud. And moreover, now we're exchanging data with, ACOs and health information exchanges. So you're moving data from back and forth. Your clearinghouse vendors flowing through your vendor. So a lot of touch points. So I think you're better in the cloud, but I don't think I would ever say you don't have to worry.
Yeah, I think when you move to the cloud, and the cloud is one of those things. 10 years ago, people were like, it was, what AI is today. Like, okay, how are you defining it, right? Now we understand what cloud is, right? All cloud is it's a computer in someone else's data center, right? So looking at, the EMRs, looking at O365, those are all cloud applications, right? Software as a service. Understanding who is responsible for what in those environments is the key to this, right? Saying our data is secure because it's in the cloud. Some things are handled by your third party the vendor there, but are they responsible for backing up that data, or are they just handling the OS patching and patching the software? Who's responsible for user administration, right? If there's a user that's been in there for 5 years, they haven't worked for us for 4 years, and their password is password, right? That's on us. So
Right.
really understanding what your responsibilities are, who's handling what, you have the same sort of security and controls needs in the cloud. It's just someone else is doing some of them. You're still responsible for those. And then you have to verify through third-party risk management that your third-party cloud provider, your software as a service provider is doing those things, right? And that's where they go out and get those high trust certifications so that someone is verifying that they're checking all those boxes. Well, what are we responsible for, and are we handling those policies, those processes, and doing what we're responsible for?
Yeah.
And you go
One
back.
additional recommendation or tip I'll add to this concern is that because you are going to the cloud, there is the assumption that one appealing benefit of this is that you do want to shift the burden of this responsibility. And because it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. Having said that, your contract probably doesn't hold them accountable in the event that there's a breach on their end, and it should. And it should stipulate who's responsible for what and specifically what the insurance is. Most contracts are only liable, or vendors are only liable up to what you paid in on the last 12 months. So that would be the extent of their liability. It's hard to get them to go above that, but what I typically recommend that they usually do accept is that their insurance, to whatever extent you can collect from their policy, would kick in first before your insurance would kick in second. So that would be one recommendation you could at least ask for in a contract.
Yeah. But even with all those extra cloud protections, back to the social engineering point where an employee inadvertently opens a door, we can have it in a well-protected cloud environment with all the right things from the owner of that software and managing our data. But if someone comes in, once they're inside the moat, they're in the moat, right?
Yeah. And we'll get into this later in the presentation about how do you prevent those. There are tools now, very sophisticated tools that can monitor employee activities. We had an incident here at Coker where one of our accounting individuals fired up their laptop at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, we know this person never works at 3 o'clock in the morning. In fact, come 5 o'clock, they're gone. They've never sent a single email on a Saturday or Sunday. So we thought that was very suspicious, looked into it, and sure enough, that computer was compromised. So sometimes just there's tools now that can monitor your users, and it knows based on profiles and activity. You see activity coming from Russia, you probably want to look into that. So there are now tools that can help reduce that risk.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's one other quick point on that. With this, I mean, if we're talking about your EMR in the cloud, right? Jeffrey just brought up the endpoint, right? We're responsible for the endpoint that's connecting to the cloud. So if we are not securing our endpoint, we're not securing our users. Yeah, the data in the cloud might be secure, but I'm sure a lot of users are downloading data onto their machine, right? Or if they do have that user access, they can go in and pull down data at will, right? So that's what that shared responsibilities matrix, who's responsible for what and how do we have, what controls do we have in each of those different areas is absolutely key in those type of relationships.
Awesome. Let's look at the fourth and final myth today, and we're hearing this one more and more. Hey, we have cyber insurance, so worst case scenario, we're covered. I talked to an administrator recently, and I said, tell me how you think about cyber. It's like, I just got the most insurance possible, and that was literally the sum total of the strategy. Let's talk about cyber insurance, both the goods and increasingly some of the gotchas. Jeffrey, what have you seen with your clients around cyber insurance in the event of a breach?
Yeah, and one of the things I know this audience will relate to, because we're all in healthcare and we deal with insurance companies all the time. Cybersecurity insurance carriers are no different than Aetna, Blue Cross, Cigna. They have rules, and they will deny and kick back a claim if you do not submit that claim precisely to those rules. No authorization, no referrals, you're not getting paid. Cybersecurity insurance, in fact, Clark Howard says never take the rental car insurance. I never do. I waived it, and I actually hit a tire the other day on a highway. It turns out that my insurance doesn't cover lost use of the rental car, so I'm now waiting for Avis to call me. So insurance has all kinds of little gotchas that allow them to deny claims or exclude coverage. The most common one that you might be surprised about is they typically do not cover employee negligence, meaning that if the employee was the source, they're protecting you from the outside. They kind of expect you to make sure your employees are properly trained. So if the breach was due to employee negligence, you may get denied just for that reason. They also have a whole laundry list of things they expect you to do to have the coverage, your security risk assessments, your training, your pen testing. They expect that no different than your car insurance. You're not going to get cheap insurance if you rack up a lot of tickets. So all insurance companies are designed, in my opinion, to find ways to deny claims. That's why they make so much money. So just be aware that it's good to have, you should have it, just understand their rules. And if you're not sure, send a contract over to us. We'll look at it. There's never a charge for that. But I want you to make sure that you know what those rules are, because they use those rules to deny claims all the time.
Yeah, I appreciate the parallel to, folks in this audience that have been on the other side of that with prior auth and denials on our rev cycle. It really is the same mentality. I spoke with the in-house lawyer for a cyber carrier the other day, and he absolutely affirmed, before we're going to write a big check, we're going to go through the fine print and confirm that our covered client did in fact do their part to mitigate the risk that they agreed to in their contract with us. Because he said, we did our underwriting and pricing based on the assumptions that the covered company was going to do what they were supposed to do. He said, oftentimes we find they did not, and we're not in the habit of writing checks if it's not our fault. So, yeah, Tim, what were you going to say here?
Yeah, this is an area that has changed a lot over the last 5+ years. 5 years ago, when I was doing a lot of incident response, cyber insurance was out there just paying ransoms left and right, even when they didn't really necessarily need to. That caught up with them, and over the last 3 to 4 years, I've seen probably about a third of the conversations that I've had with clients or prospective clients start with, well, my cyber insurance company is asking for X, Y, and Z, or our premiums are going to quadruple or go up. I think 6x is probably the most I saw, because they don't want to pay out, right? So they want you to have, if you're 90, they're not going to give you a ton of life insurance, right? And not check your health, right? It's the same sort of thing. If you're not doing the basics with cyber security, cyber insurance is not going to come in and give you a policy. So they've been, and it varies greatly from insurance company to insurance company. There's typically 10 to 20 requirements they have around. Yeah, you have multi-factor, you have 24/7 monitoring and alerting, et cetera. But it's up to you to say, yeah, we have that or not, right? There's no audit, there's no attestation from your cyber insurance company to say, yeah, you're doing that. And security isn't binary. It's not you're either secure or insecure, right? Control might be working today and somebody does something that is not working tomorrow, right? So that's where they would come in to say, the controls that we require, were they in place during this breach? Yes or no, right? So that's it has changed greatly. I would encourage everyone to look at their cyber insurance policy. Most of the cyber insurance companies also give you resources around, creating your incident response plan, and they have preferred vendors to do incident response. So look through those before you, God forbid, have an incident, because that's when you're in the middle of a ransomware attack. That's not the time to realize you don't know who to call and what to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I do want to end on a positive, but and Tim, you touched on it. The cyber insurance policies normally come with a wealth of support, policies, guidance, consultations. They don't want to pay out, so it's in their best interest to help you. So lean on them if you need those tools. They're oftentimes at no cost, and they're just part of the benefit package that you get. It's kind of like your health insurance offering free gym membership. It's for a reason. It's for because they don't pay out if they don't have to.
Yeah, I think I've seen some, I don't even remember which cyber insurance company it was, but they would give you like even reduced rates on, know before, or other security awareness training solutions. So that's, we all know that, we've seen the stats, right? Most of the breaches start with social engineering, right? So the end user is normally the person that opens the door. They're not doing it maliciously. It's there's been fish that I've almost fell for because they look so real, so convincing that it's getting harder and harder, and with AI it's going to be even worse in the future. So focusing on securing your user and giving your users the right tools to identify those type of attacks is absolutely key, and cyber insurance has helped with that as well.
And I've seen some actually give the discount if you use high trust vendors. So one easy thing that everyone should do quickly is see if that's a benefit. Your vendor will send you proof that they're high trust certified. Just shoot it over to your carrier. It's not a big discount. It's usually 2 or 3 points, but nonetheless, it saves a few bucks. So
we'll come back to this cyber topic right at the end. Guys, clearly we don't have time today to talk about all the things that you ought to do to protect against the threats we've discussed. High level, though, let's hit a couple of headlines that you guys would leave people with. Talk about the annual security risk assessment that oftentimes feels like this perfunctory thing I've got to do to check a box on that form. Why does this matter? And why should this be taken as a really, really important annual exercise?
Well,
Jeffrey?
I think the obvious would be that it's so fluid, it's changing, and you could literally pass an SRA with flying colors, and the next day someone clicks on something. So it's a constant reevaluation. There's the risks are never static; they're always circulating, and it's just something. The reason why it's an annual requirement is because organizations pass all the time, and then shortly thereafter something is at risk, and so there's devices, there's software that needs updating. The vast majority of the time where people fail is their patching. It's just outdated. They have all these apps that they just didn't keep current with their latest version. So sometimes it's training, but more times than not. And by the way, I rarely ever see an organization 100% pass. If it's a properly done SRA, there's always going to be some things that will flag as risk. They usually rank them in high, medium, and low, so you can kind of prioritize what you work on. But be that as it may, it's always changing. So that's why you got to do it frequently.
So Tim, here's a handful of steps. Obviously, number two is on the SRA. One or two things here that you would say to folks, man, make sure this is at the top of your priority list.
Yeah, I think what Jeffrey said on the SRA is spot on, right? The one thing I would say is if you haven't done it or you haven't looked at it in a while, start there, right? Look at what the scope of that assessment was. And it's not supposed to be something that you do once, you check the box, and then you set it to the side for another year and then redo the assessment, right? It is helping you identify the biggest areas of risk in your environment and how we're going to address those. That should be a living document in that if there are major changes to your environment, right? You change EMRs, you have an acquisition, you have a divestiture, right? You start and have a relationship with a new application vendor, right? That should kick off your SRA process to say, okay, what is the risk related to that? How does that change our environment? So I would start there and really understanding and doing periodic risk assessments and looking at that. The other couple of things on here that are absolutely key. I mean, patching is, we all know we need to patch. Everyone struggles with it. Focus on your end users, right? Protecting them, giving them the right tools to identify phishing, vishing, smishing, all the other new attacks that are out there. And if you don't have multi-factor authentication, please do that today. Because even if someone does click on phishing, multi-factor often can save you from that. So, security is absolutely fluid, right? It changes day by day. So you really need to stay aware and reassess your environment and look at new threats and vulnerabilities and new attack methods and how that impacts your environment.
Awesome. Guys, this has been great. We've got a few questions coming in, and we'll be opening it up. If you have questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. Here's one. We've mentioned social engineering. Jeffrey, first of all, just unpack that definitionally. What do we mean by social engineering? And is there anything we can actually do to stop it?
Yeah, I find social engineering one of the more terrifying aspects of your challenge here. And I'll give you, for those that may not have heard of what this concept is or strategy that hackers use, it's where they very intentionally profile and attack you as an individual based on things going on in your life. So an example, a real life example, we see these kind of posts all the time on Facebook. Please pray for my sister, recently diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Not an unusual post. We see things like that a lot. The hacker picks up on that. The next thing that happens is they get an email to donate to a foundation in their sister's name for ovarian cancer. Now you think that kind of emotion going on in your life, you doesn't play, I mean, the sister's name and everything's on there. So they gather information. I mean, it's really, there's a special place in hell for people that do that, but that's how they get you to click on things. So the PDF comes in, looks like it's something that is part of your life going on. You click on it, and next thing you know, a Trojan horse just entered your IT environment. So they use very much, and you might say, well, how do they get that? Well, we tend to post a lot of stuff. We post a
Right.
lot of personal
Right.
information about ourselves that make it very easy for them to craft whatever it could be. Heck, they'd probably get me if they sent me a picture of a boat or something, a center console. I'd click on that. I won one. I don't know, but yeah, they're sneaky. They can. They like to leave jump drives in your practice waiting. I mean, who doesn't want to see what's on a jump drive? I'll plug.
Yeah.
I mean, might be something good on that jump drive. Um, they get really sneaky. They come in as a fake patient sometimes, and I left my insurance card at home, but if you could just log into this web portal, you can download my insurance card and my benefits. What front desk person doesn't want to be helpful? They don't want to get yelled at for
Right.
not getting the insurance. So the social engineering is really when they target the individuals. So Tim, to your answer your question is lots of training. There's not a piece of technology that I know of that can prevent that from happening. It requires awareness, education, training,
Right.
test your employees, try to hack your own employees,
Right.
run phishing campaigns against yourself to see. And surprisingly, it's sometimes your most technically inclined employees who fall for that
Right.
stuff. But
Right.
that's the key. You gotta
But
train and test.
yeah, you're right. It is ironic, especially, we've got some practice leaders listening to this that have spent time trying to teach a customer service orientation to their front desk, and that very value of being nice and helpful creates vulnerability. Tim, there's a second question targeted for you. You had mentioned vulnerability scans. And the questioner asked, do you have specific tools that you recommend for that? I mean, this could turn into kind of an endless discussion of tools. How do we think about specific tools?
Yeah, I love questions about, what's the best tool for, for this problem or that problem. And my answer typically is the tool that you're using properly, right? The tool that's configured properly, you're monitoring, you're using it, et cetera. I can point to a half a dozen vulnerability assessment tools that are good, right? There's probably way more than that, but those are probably just the ones I've used. I often see people buy them, half implement them, schedule it, scan once a month, and then never look at it. So the tool that you're going to actually use correctly and monitor and follow up on what the findings are. So it doesn't have to be purchasing a tool. It could be using a third-party vendor that does that for you, because then they're contractually required to run those scans and follow up on those and give you reports on where your biggest risks and
Yeah.
vulnerabilities are. So, yeah, I mean, you can obviously go to the Gartner Magic Quadrant or Forrester and say, who are the top leaders in the category,
Mhm.
and pick one of those tools. They're all good. But if you don't know how to use it and you're not using it consistently, then it's probably better to use a third party that does that for you.
Well, the biggest takeaway from listening to you guys is there's not a tool that is the answer. You're talking about an entire system, an entire mindset, process, people, monitoring, feedback. So even the idea, yes, you want a good vulnerability scan tool, either yourself or with a partner that provides that service for you. But one tool doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, and I'll add that, and I'll say this strictly as an advisor that has no affiliation with products or tools. I couldn't run a tool if you asked me to. We would typically
Perfect time to freeze.
IT
I think.
department or their current vendor running it, but it helps to have an outside third party opinion because more times than not, you want the tool to be run kind of in the blind. You don't if a department knows you're going to sort of it's kind of like grading your own paper, right? You have and also it strengthens your ability to make the case in the event of a breach because you can demonstrate that you are actually getting third party validation. Now you can oftentimes state that the person doing the scan doesn't do the remediation to have a little bit of separation there. But my advice is to consider a third party outside of your current IT vendor, so that way you get a true non-biased assessment.
So this one's not fair because I need a short answer. but I'm not surprised there are two AI-related questions. The first one is around what's the additional risk related to voice-based AI ambient listening tools that providers are using for their documentation. So let me start there. These are proliferating all over the place. Is there new levels of risk as the AI listens to the patient encounter?
Yeah, that's hard to answer on a short one, but the short answer is yes, there is new risk.
All right. And Tim, I'll give you another one that needs a relatively short answer. What's the risk if we share data with third-party AI tools? Not that anybody, I'm sure, has ever put any patient data in Chat GPT, but maybe some of our employees have had that idea. What's the risk when we begin to engage with those open third-party AI tools?
Yeah, it's there's no short answer here. I mean, I think it goes back to kind of what I said about the cloud vendors and things like that. Really, you need to take a look at what those vendors are doing with that data, how they're controlling that data, what that shared responsibilities matrix looks like, if they have high trust certifications, et cetera. So third-party risk management is absolutely key in any scenario where your patient data is being sent to a third party and they have access to it.
And
Yeah.
Tim, one thing I want everyone in the audience to do today, go look at your patient consent, and I guarantee you that your patient consent form right now clearly states that you're not sharing information with third party without their consent. But most of you are, and maybe you are unknowingly. Now, it doesn't mean you cannot and you should not. What you want to solve for is just have parity, meaning that in your consent form, we use tools and work with third parties that enable us to provide patient engagement, your patient portal, things akin to that. So every practice does it. You just need to make sure the patient is aware that it's happening. The old BAAs and old consent forms was way before all this automation, and we haven't updated it. So you just simply need to have parity. I mean, take your vendor contractor, your vendor at BAA, and make sure it reflects what you're actually telling your patients, because many of you are telling your patients right now that you don't do this when you are actually doing it. So just pair them up. That's all you got to do to fix it.
Yeah, BAA management is a full-time job. Hey, the good news is the last two questions do have short answers, and they're both good answers. I'll answer one. If your system gets hacked, is it okay to pay the ransom? Actually, I'm not going to answer it. What I am going to do is say, why don't you come back on August 5th when we do part 2 of this webinar series that should be titled Holy Cats, We've Had a Breach, Now What? And we will walk through the entire process of what transpires, including the question of that Hamlet wanted to ask, to pay or not to pay. That is the question.
Nice teaser. I like it.
It's a complicated one. The last question I'm really grateful for because we've actually got a gift related to this question. Somebody said you guys have talked a lot about cyber insurance and we don't know what's in it. Maybe finance signed it because it was a cost and didn't have IT involved. How do we figure out what's in our cyber insurance policy? And we have an offer for the folks that are here today. If I could get the next slide, this might be one you want to take a picture of. But Jeffrey and Tim have both agreed that if you will reach out to them at these emails below, we from the Focus side, Coker from their side, will be happy to take a look at your policy, particularly as it relates to these obligations that could void your policy or reduce your coverage. Have a quick conversation with you and let you know, kind of what the key things are, sort of translate the legalese to more practical implementation things. So if that is you and you would like a couple of these professional guys who do this for a living to help you take a look, we'll be more than happy to do that. With that, Jeffrey, Tim, thanks a bunch. I know we only began to scratch the surface on this. And again, we'll come back on August the 5th and talk about what happens once a breach occurs. Again, as a reminder, stand by. Sometime in the next day or so, you'll get an email that will have a link to the recording. We'll also have information about continuing ed and a reminder on that for August 5th. Finally, want to say thanks to Val, who is our behind the scenes producer that made the three of us look great. We so appreciate your help. For those of you that joined us, thank you for giving us some of your time today, and we hope you left with a good learning and exchange for your time. Be well and have a great day.
Thank you.